Hey everybody, so I just wanted to give you a short review or overview of Standard 1B. We're going to get into talking about the different colonial regions. We're going to talk about the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. But this particular lesson, we're going to be talking about the southern colonies and several things that you need to make note of. One of the things we're going to talk about is geography and climate, okay? How it differs, how the southern colonies were different than the New England colonies or the middle colonies when it came to geography and climate. We're also going to talk about how they made their money. What was their economy based on? So were they building stuff, or were they growing stuff, or were they whatever? Okay, that's going to be their economic development. We're going to talk about their relationship with the Native Americans, because obviously those guys were here before us, right? And so we're going to, the colonists are going to end up running into them. We need to know what the relationship was between the colonists and the Indians based on the different regions. So today we're going to specifically focus on the southern colonies. And you can see on the map, the southern colonies are in the lime green color, right? So Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, there's several of them listed there. Okay, I wanted to review with you right quick from what we learned from Standard 1A. And so I gave you some examples here, and I was going to see if you could come up with the key term. All right, so let's say I'm the Queen of England and I want a favorable balance of trade. What economic policy should I use if I want a favorable balance of trade for England? Hopefully, the word mercantilism just jumped right into your head, right? Because mercantilism is an economic policy that England used to have a favorable balance of trade with the colonies, right? Okay, so here's the next one. I'm an English merchant selling my goods to Africa. So I am selling my product to different countries in Africa. What trade route do I use? So I'm from England and I'm going to Africa. We know that is one leg of the transatlantic trade, right? So if I'm taking goods from England and bringing them to Africa, that is one leg of the transatlantic trade system. And then the third one says, I am a poor English person who can't afford a ticket to the colonies. What should I do, right? So our choice here, hopefully you're thinking in your mind, is to become an indentured servant, right? So in exchange for the price of a ticket to the colonies, I am going to work for someone over there by contract for up to 4 to 7 years. And then once those years are up, then I am free to do what I want. So mercantilism, transatlantic trade, and indentured servant. 3 really important key terms. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the different colonial regions. Okay, up in the left, you see what the southern colonies looked like. Down at the bottom, you see the middle colonies. We'll talk about them in another little video, and then also the New England colonies up on the right. But we're going to be talking about the southern colonies. So take a good look at that picture up in the top left, and we're going to talk about that. All right. I was just for your own benefit. If you want to try to get all this information in one good spot, you might want to make yourself a little chart that looks something like this, and you can just list all the different characteristics of the different colonial regions, okay? So let's get on to southern colonies. Okay, so the southern colonies included Virginia, Maryland, Carolina, which will eventually split into North and South Carolina, and Georgia. So some of you might not consider Virginia and Maryland part of the South per se, right? But they are part of the original 13 colonies, and they were considered a southern colony, mainly because of how they make their money, right? So those are the southern colonies. The thing about the southern colonies is all of them had warm climate, right? They had very rich soil, and they had a long growing season. That means they could grow crops for longer periods of time in the year, right? So because of that, the southern colonies are going to base their economy on agriculture, right? Growing crops. They also had some really deep rivers that would go inland, very far inland. So these farmers who lived, up South Carolina, inland a ways, could grow their crops sail their boats up in there and load all of their crops, their rice, their indigo, whatever it was, onto the boats, and then sail them back out to Charleston, to that port city, and then they could sell their goods, right? So when we talk about southern colonies, we need to know it was a very warm climate, very rich soil, long growing season. So their economy was based on agriculture. And when we say agriculture, we mean tobacco, indigo, corn, rice, things like that. All right, one of the reasons why the southern colonies were successful in like agriculture, right, was because of the climate. But I want you to look at that red line that runs down that top map. It's called a fall line, okay? When you look at, say, Georgia, find the state of Georgia on that map and look at the fall line. Most of the people who lived in Georgia that lived north of that fall line were what we call subsistence farmers. That means they were just like their own family farm. They grew only what they needed to grow to live off of and eat, okay? When you think big plantations, most of those were south of that fall line, okay? Commercial farms were south of the fall line. So when we think about where most of the slaves were, they were going to be on farms south of the fall line, okay? Now, if you look at that picture on the bottom, that is a picture of a rice plantation right outside of Charleston, South Carolina, that you can go visit today. It's called Middleton Place. But if you notice, there's a lot of water next to the land, isn't it? So what would happen was in those little retaining ponds, they would grow the rice. And then the boats would sail up right there to the edge and they'd load the rice on there, and then they would sail back down to Charleston, to the port city. So that's just an example of what maybe a southern plantation south of the fall line would have looked like. The other thing I want you to be aware of is the relations with the Indians in the southern colonies. Actually, the relations with the Indians started out pretty peaceful. Okay, when they first established those southern colonies, they got along okay with the Native Americans. But as more colonists arrive and they need more and more land for these big plantations where they're growing lots of crops, they're going to move onto more and more of that Native American land. And then they're going to get upset. The Indians are going to get upset, and we're going to see that relationship become more violent. So as the southern colonies grow larger and become more populated, and they need more land to grow those cash crops, they're going to start knocking heads with the Native Americans. But it didn't start out that way, okay? So just again, when we talk about the southern colonies, they were basically founded for economic reasons, not religious reasons. And what their economy is based on is agriculture, and that their relationship with the Indians started out okay, and then it gradually got worse as they needed more and more land. Okay. And I think that's the last thing I was going to show you. Yeah, we'll deal with this later.